yard with a whole bunch of dandelions? What picture comes to your mind? Beauty of blooms of different flowers. How many wildflowers can you identify? Here's a question. What's the difference between a wildflower and a weed? Still remember as a kid working at the greenhouse, and among the other perennials that were sold in pots were thistles. People would plant these blooming thistles. They throw a whole bunch of nasty seeds all over that apparently birds liked. Farmers thought that was the stupidest thing they'd ever seen. Especially if they'd spent half a day out in their field trying to dig those things up. Yeah. How'd they figure that out? You'd almost think there was some plan there in place. So what kind of flowers can you identify? Most probably know what a rose is, or carnation. Chrysanthemums, tulips. So we're getting close to Easter, so we should at least know tulips, hyacinths, and daffodils, right? Those are the three main ones that are up front, some lilies, but there's an enormous assortment. All different colors. There are flowers that they don't get any higher than this. And they're covered with hundreds of tiny little blossoms. Sometimes those can come in a purple variety. Mostly they're white. And they'll spread out a little bit. The seeds are really tiny. Incredibly impressive how full they look. And the blossoms are just tiny. How about hibiscus? That's a different end of the spectrum. Those are huge. Huge flowers. There are perennials, there are annuals, there are biennials, which means what, by the way? You have to purchase them. You buy them. Yes. Means they blossom every other year, sort of. Because what they do is they throw seed that comes up later and grows a little bit, and then those, after wintering, will bloom the next season. And you have all sorts of varieties. You have, particularly in an area like this, they now even define them more specifically, like half-hardy perennials. In other words, they'll survive as a perennial in some places, but if it dies in your yard, too bad, buy them again next year. And so you've got all the variety, all the different size, and they smell different. There's a big difference between the scent of a sweet pea and it just slipped my mind. Yeah, fir trees. Well, marigolds are different, and petunias are different, particularly after the rain. And nicotiana, that's it. Nicotiana, it's got a real spicy odor to it. There's all sorts of varieties. Some with lots of pollen. If you like that sort of thing, or if you are physically opposed to, say, a field full of goldenrod, and then there are weeds. Why do we call them weeds in the first place? Look at Genesis 1. I don't see weeds listed here. Although he says, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed. And he doesn't specifically say weeds. We identify them as weeds. Why? Because of the fall. Last testament to immortality. Weeds are hard to kill sometimes. Some more than others. And they obey their command to produce after their own kind much more abundantly than most other plants. You leave a couple of weeds in your garden to go to seed at the end of the season, and you're going to end up with 99.9% germination from the weeds that thing throws. And it chokes out the good stuff. And it's not what you want when you put stuff in the ground. But there it is, and it grows, and it's everywhere. And with perhaps a delightful sense of humor, the birds will pick up those seeds from one place and they'll transport them to your garden. And they will do that kind of thing over and over and over and over. We have weeds. We have some what we refer to now as invasive species. Plants that grow so tough, they just take over everything. And some that do that kind of thing are not in the category that we would normally say are weeds or bad, right? You ever grow peppermint? Anything in the mint family? Once it gets established, you better have some sort of barrier where you want it to stop. I have a rock bed around mine, and I will spray just on the outside of the rock so it won't shoot up anything new there and spread beyond that, but that entire spot is just, yeah, you could dig up all sorts of roots and shoots from that and plant them somewhere else, and they would fill right back in. You'd never know. It's amazing how those things grow. It's nice. It is nice to have the abundance of that, but it's amazing. Any of you travel to tropical places where houseplants grow outside as shrubs? That is cool. What? Yeah? Yep. Yeah, there's far too many delightful plants with thorns on them just for the sake of reminding us of what Adam did. Yep. And I've been to places, South America, even Egypt. Bird of paradise. I remember in Egypt walking at the Bible campground where we had the pastors' conference, and there were bird of paradise along one of the sidewalks, and took pictures of that. They're just growing outside as year-round plants, as shrubs, and ones that multicolored you have in the house and you have in a pot, and they might get so big. South America, they might be 6 foot tall. 4 foot, 6 foot wide, and just a full shrub. It grows year round. All different depending on the place that you have them. It's amazing. I mean, when you try to envision what that moment looked like when God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants, yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit tree in which there's seed." I mean, like I said, you could have a meadow, a rolling meadow with all of these wildflowers. You could have beautiful bed. You could have a field full of lavender. Can you imagine that? Not only would it be pretty, the smell would be enchanting. It would be fantastic. And it just all the different colors and shapes and sizes and smells. And or would you picture a forest full of trees? How many trees can you identify? And how do you identify trees? There are 3 different ways, primarily. The leaves, the bark, and the grain. Yeah, my dad could identify just about any tree from the grain. Once you cut it, he could identify it. The bark. Not all trees have bite, just bark. Sassafras. Yeah, how about willow trees? Where they grow, they're all different. Or lack thereof. Nothing more impressive than trees growing out of what just looks like sheer rock. There doesn't be any soil there whatsoever. You don't know how did that thing germinate in the first place? How did it sustain enough moisture for the duration of time? How did it survive and grow there? And they seem to be the toughest. By the way, if you were into shipmaking and wanted a pole for mast, you would want a tree that grows high on rock, because they are going to be the tightest rings, hardest lumber that you could find in your location. And yeah, there's all different varieties of trees in different locations. There's the purple heartwood, green heartwood in Guyana. They have another wood that's it's a cousin to those two, has to be, called ironwood. No surprise how it got its name. You can't hammer a nail into it. You have to have a very good drill bit and drill a hole first. It's that hard. Sparks fly when they cut it. And then we have pine. You can drive over some pine with a tractor and it'll just like mush it up. It'll squish it. It's that soft at times. Gopher wood. Yes? Yep. The pine makes some good long beams, and there are some enormous pine trees. Oak trees, maple trees, redbuds. It won't be too long, hopefully. Those will come to life, and we'll see them remind us that life comes back once again, and they will light up the... Amazing, isn't it? Sometimes you just you just see little patches of them in the middle of nowhere in the forest on the side of the road. And how did they get there? And any of you, by the way, out of curiosity, any of you grow any trees from seed? What kind? Avocado. You grew one, and I don't know how big it grows. Probably larger in its native territory than in a pot, because I've considered doing the very similar thing with coffee beans, for obvious reasons. I have grown, well, all the red buds in my yard I started from seed after our house fire. One of the blue spruce trees in our yard I started from seed years ago. Many of them are in the property east or west of us. And a whole bunch of them. I used to do that just because I'd go through the seed catalog and it would list how difficult it was for the seed. You know, here's beginner, this is easy, and you know, and this was like, you know, don't try this unless you you know, have a psychiatrist. I would try those. Cactus, I did the same thing. There are too many dangerous stories of how successful that was. But I had some enormous cactus that I took with me for years until those things with enormous barbs were still present and we had toddlers and something had to go, one or the other. It was the cactus. But pine trees take a while. Once they sprout, in the first year, they're only going to get about that big. And it takes a while before they're anything sizable to even think about transplanting in a way that, you know, 2 bites from a rabbit's not going to completely kill it off. Then you look out in the forest and you wonder, all these trees that just naturally, because that's the way God designed them to do it, reproduce, and they're all over. Forests that are full of maples. Of course, in the spring, you see the seeds fly down, and then you see the undergrowth. You see the new ones coming up. There's a property up north. It's state land across from the cabin where we go to hunt in the fall, and quite a number of years back, they just cleared that. Cleared the one spot, lumbered it, and then cleared it. And this year we could finally walk through it fairly well. The undergrowth, the trees are now about 20 foot tall, but it came in so thick, you couldn't hardly fit between all of these saplings growing up. It was just ridiculous. Nobody planted that. It grew. Just like it was supposed to. Just like God intended it to. Any of you grow a peach tree from a seed? Any of you ever tried that? I've tried that. Wasn't successful. Most of those are grafted now. They take a hardier variety and take what they want and graft it in. Obviously, it reduces the duration of time you have to wait till you get some fruit. Plus, there's a lot more consistency in the variety that you want. There are trees that lose their leaves. They're deciduous. They drop their leaves. Spring, they get a whole new batch. There are evergreens that also drop their needles occasionally throughout the season. But even though they drop needles, they flush with new needles, and they're, as we call them, evergreen. They're always green. There are trees that flower and trees that don't. Maple trees produce a seed, but they don't blossom. They don't blossom like a redbud or a tulip tree. Oh wait, tulip trees don't really flower. They just have leaves that are shaped like a tulip. There's all sorts of trees. Trees that produce fruit. Varieties of fruit. Some fruit that might look good, but you wouldn't want to eat much of it. But the inner part of the seed, you probably would. There are nut trees. Nasty. The fruit may look edible when it's ripe, in a sense, and very acidic. That rots off and it's left with a hard shell. The nuts are, the seed is taken and roasted. We call them cashews. It's interesting. We get nuts from trees, we get nuts from the ground. All this variety. You want to narrow down to one branch. You've got varieties of nuts that grow in the ground, underground. And you've got nuts that grow on trees. How many different varieties of nuts that grow on trees can you identify? I mean, think of the variety just there. I already told you cashews. You've got walnuts and chestnuts and hickory nuts, pecans, almonds. It's amazing, isn't it? And there are more varieties than that. Especially if you show up in a crowd of mixed nuts. There's all sorts of crazies. Fruit trees, deciduous trees, evergreen trees, flowering trees. And then there are viney trees, if you will. I mean, as Jesus tells us in John, you've got the grapevine that some of them can grow what seems like a decent amount of little tree at the base at least, but it's only good for fruit. Bittersweet. The grape is only good for fruit. It's not good for wood. It's too fragile. Although there are uses, I guess, for grape leaves. Any of you eat grape leaves? In the Greek food, yeah, and Middle Eastern. They had grape leaves in some of the different dishes that they made in Iraq, and I was not all impressed with the leaves. I was impressed with the rest of the dish, for the most part, but not the leaves themselves. Thought they were bitter, but the variety. You've got trees that grow where it's hot and dry. and you've got you put a weeping willow near your septic, and the roots are going to find any moisture there, and it's going to grow like crazy. They will find the drainage pipes from your downspouts and work their way in there and take over there too. Trees that only get a certain height, trees that get enormous. Such variety, such display of beauty. And again, not just visual beauty, think of the different odors you get. One of the delights of my childhood was walking in the garage and the smell of fresh cut wood. Dad was always working on a project. The table saw was always going. Planer was always going. And just that smell of that wood. What do you get from an acorn besides a bunch of squirrels? An oak tree. Why? How does an oak tree or an acorn have enough sense to obey the command of God? Because He made it. The earth brought forth, God said, let the earth do this. And the earth did. It brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, according to their kinds, their own kinds, trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. Notice the repetition here. Each according to its kind. This breadth of variety of vegetables and flowers. We didn't even get into vegetables. How much fun would that be? There's so many varieties, there's so many colors, there's so many shapes and sizes. And what do you plant to grow a seedless watermelon? It's interesting, isn't it? The manipulation that man has learned with the variety that God has put in this. So you've got vegetables and flowers and shrubs and vines and trees of all sorts, all shapes and sizes, all different smells, all different colors, everything. Just enormous beauty. And each does exactly as God commanded it. It bears according to its own kind. Any of you play around with saving seeds, collecting seed, manipulating any of that? Different ones, it's a different process with different seeds. And interesting, if you're going to collect seeds, particularly if you're talking vegetable seeds for your garden, or flower seeds, if you have a particular flowers you want to collect the seed, you are going to most likely collect the seed from, if it's a vegetable, from the best out there, from the best fruit. If you're going to collect flower seed, you're going to collect from whatever it is that you find more desirable. If it's a larger plant, if it's a sturdy, whatever particular characteristics that plant has, of particular shades or colors, or however it endures throughout whatever it's faced through the season, you collect that particular seed. Why? Because you want those characteristics to be passed to animals. Is you actually lose information. So if you have a flower that you like a particular shade and color and you're collecting seed only from that plant, and you plant those and you repeat this for a number of seasons, you have, over the course of time, effectively eliminated certain color patterns that may have been otherwise present in that variety. All of that programmed in, put there in the beginning by the Creator. All of it. This vast variety of all of it consistently obedient to the command of God. A potato knows enough, because of the way God made it at His command, that when you take a potato and you put it in the ground, you are going to sprout a potato plant. I plant multiple varieties of potatoes. Want to know something interesting? I separate them when I plant them, and when the plants come up, they produce, I start digging them. I know where one ends and the other starts. Because if I plant red potatoes, I always get red potatoes. If I plant white potatoes, I always get white potatoes. A couple years for fun, I planted purple potatoes. Works great for mashed potatoes for a potluck. Plant purple potatoes, you get purple potatoes. Pears do the same thing. Lesser quality and value, but they do the same thing. Even, and for good reason, but even a pear knows to produce more pears. I want to go back just for a couple seconds and reset your mind in this. We look for a foundation of how we view the world. What makes sense? How do we interpret everything? Look at what we see. The evidence says exactly what is stated for us in verse 1. In the beginning, God created. The clear evidence is God made this. He made it exactly as He said He did. And it all obeys His verbal command. Consistently. And with beauty. Over and over and over. Father, thank You for the display of Your power and Your beauty in creation. All the trees and plants and flowers and vegetables and fruits and all the things that You have made. We are in what we call the dead of winter now, and soon much of what has lost its leaves, much of what has disappeared into the ground will come back to life. And it will continue to do what You've commanded it to do. And we praise You for that, and we thank You in Jesus' name. Amen.